The greatest fighter plane of its time, the P-51 Mustang is powered by the Rolls-Royce's Merlin engine and fought against the German Air Force while it escorted bombers across Europe. The P-51 Mustang was developed by the North American Aviation Company for the British Royal Air Force in 1940. The British needed a fighter to protect their bombers during day bombing raids in Germany and their territories. The British exchanged ideas with the North American Aviation Company in hopes of being able to produce a fighter that could escort their fighters throughout the bomber's entire mission, because their current fighters didn't have the range to do so. The North American Aviation Company offered to make a better fighter than the one the British had designed. The British agreed to go with the new design, so the North American Aviation Company made the P-51, originally known as the XP-78. The British named the XP-78 the Mustang, and it was later decided to change the XP-78 to the P-50. The test flight of the P-51 took place in Britain, 1942. The overall plane was good, but it didn't have an engine that could give it the range and altitude to be effective in the war. Harker, the test pilot, suggested changing the engine from the Allison engine to the Rolls-Royce's Merlin engine. The Merlin engine gave the P-51 the altitude capability and also the range it needed to be the game-changing plane in the war. Previously, the fighter escorts in the bombing campaign couldn't go far enough to keep the bombers safe, so that left the British to do night raids with an increased chance of missing the target, or to continue day raids with the increased chance of losing bombers to the German Air Force. So to fix the problem, the British exchanged ideas with the North American Aviation Company to produce the P-51. With its increased range and altitude capabilities, the P-51 was easily the best plane of its time, being able to outfly and outrange all the other planes of its time. It was the perfect fighter escort for day raids in Germany. It could go as far as it needed to, and also could rival the might of the German Air Force. Was the P-51 difficult to fly?
Easy in a way and difficult in another way, because it was powerful. And if you give it the throttle, it could cause the airplane to swing like this. Matter of fact, the first time I had to go around, I found out because I pushed the throttle over, and the airplane started skidding like this, sideways. And it was simply because of so much power. That airplane did have power.
The P-51 was equipped with 2 external fuel tanks that, when empty, could be dropped to lighten the plane's load. The P-51 Mustang was also armed with 6 .50 caliber machine guns, a maximum of 2,000 pounds of bombs, and 10 5-inch unguided rockets. The P-51, with its external fuel tanks, could fly at 1,650 miles. Also, the P-51 could fly at 437 miles per hour. What was the range of the P-51's guns?
Oh, that, as I said, they were set so that you would hit a target if the target was at 250 yards away.
Per hour. The P-51 was a revolutionary plane that changed the course of the war in the Allies' favor. Thanks to its maneuverability, the Allies lost fewer planes when they had encounters with the German Air Force. The P-51 Mustang could also fly for a long time while exploring enemy territory. This meant that Allies no longer had to do night raids and extensive exploration before sending out their bombers to bomb German territory, because they had the P-51, and that was a huge advantage. What were the advantages of the P-51?
When the P-51 was assigned over in England, the first difference it made was it had range enough that it could fly all the way with the bombers to their target in Berlin and all. And so, for the first time, they could escort a bomber all the way to its target and then all the way back to its landing place in England. That was the first and initial impact.
How difficult was it to fix and maintain the P-51?
Well, first of all, you had to know what you're doing. If you knew what you were doing, it was easy because of certain things we did. And they were easy to take care of, do, and remove and replace things.
The P-51 was created because of the lack of fighter escort for the bombers in the bombing campaign. The Spitfires and Hurricanes were the fighter escorts before the P-51, and they both lacked the range to be able to escort the bombers all the way to their targets. As a result of the lack of fighter escorts, the British were forced to do night raids with inaccurate bombing or have their bombers destroyed during encounters with the German Air Force during the day. Due to this need for fighters, the British went to the North American Aviation Company and exchanged ideas until they got the P-51. With the P-51, the British were able to do day bombing raids on Germany without losing planes and pilots. The P-51 was an essential part of the bombing campaign, where it was an escort fighter protecting bombers from the German Air Force so that they could carry out their missions. On July 4th, 1942, 2 out of 6 bombers were destroyed by German forces during a bombing raid. On August 17, 1943, 60 out of 376 bombers were again destroyed by German forces during a bombing raid. Both of these bombing raids were before the P-51, and they both had no escort when they were attacked, because the fighters couldn't escort them all the way to their target because of their limited range. Due to the lack of escorts, almost all the bomber losses took place out of the escort's range. However, after the P-51 was introduced, the encounters with the German Air Force had less casualties for the Allies and more casualties for the German Air Force. The P-51 was responsible for 40 through 45% of the German Air Force and their left-wing fighters' losses. It can be said that the Allies didn't take out the German Air Force by taking out their fields or the factories, but by taking out their pilots in air battles. The success of the bombing campaign in Europe was due to the effectiveness of the bomber's escort plane, the P-51. Without the P-51, the bombing campaign in Europe would have failed because a lot of the bombers would have been shot out of the sky, and any surviving pilots would have had to make the long journey back to England. In the meantime, England would have had to train more pilots to fly the bombers. So since the P-51 was so good at protecting the bombers, and also had the range to protect them, the bombing campaign was able to succeed. There was a total of 16,776 P-51s produced in various models at the end of World War II. There were 4 models of P-51s produced. The first one was fitted with the Allison engine and was the P-51A. The next was the P-51B and was the first model with the Rolls-Royce's Merlin engine. The P-51C was an upgraded version of the P-51B and was also fitted with the Rolls-Royce's Merlin engine, and it also was the first model with a bubble canopy. The final and last version of the P-51, the P-51D, was an upgraded version of the P-51C and again was fitted with the Rolls-Royce's Merlin engine and also had a bubble canopy. The P-51 Mustang remained in use during World War II and after World War II. The P-51 remained in use in the United States until the Korean War, when jet fighters were introduced. The P-51 Mustang was still used during the Korean War as a fighter bomber until the end of the war, when it became available for civilian use in air racing and air shows. Also, the Mustangs were sold to other countries for their use. Several countries purchased Mustangs from the United States before and after the Korean War, including Canada, France, and China. Countries like Germany and Japan, who fought the P-51s, captured some and tried to reproduce them, or bought them from the United States after the wars, since they knew their effectiveness. The United Kingdom used the P-51 throughout the World War II. They also used it until about the time the U.S. started to retire them and replace them with jet engine fighters. Eventually, as the world transitioned to jet engines, the P-51s were retired. The last P-51 to be retired was in the Dominican Republic in 1984. The P-51s can still be found in air shows, races, and museums throughout the world. Although the bombing campaign in Europe wouldn't have succeeded without the P-51 and its amazing capabilities. Was the P-51 an effective fighter plane?
So this was after watching him shoot at it for, I don't know how many times he shot at it, but it wasn't hitting anything. And then finally, I turned out there and I fired, and all of a sudden, the airplane hit and it rolled over one time, and then the landing gear came down. And Captain Benbow said, "Oh, you hit him." 2 days after the mission, a lieutenant colonel came in the Quonset where I was living, asked for me, and I was on the far side of the Quonset. He saw me and he walked across telling me, he came to walking across to me telling me, and he said, "We've just spent 3 hours analyzing your gun camera film, And we concluded you shot down that Japanese plane from 3,000 yards.